Okay, so first I would like to say that I decided to make this lecture a little bit different from what I usually talk about. And that's because in 30 minutes it's really hard to say it all. Especially in the field of artificial intelligence, I always lose tremendous amount of time just explaining how each AI model works and what it can do. So I'm going to leave out these obvious definitions this time and focus more on how to use AI tools conceptually. I don't know if you are familiar with the term synthetic media. Lukáš already was talking about it in the introduction. What we understand under synthetic media, it's media generated with artificial intelligence, fully or partially, or media that are altered and post-processed with AI-driven tools. In popular culture, it's mostly known in the form of deepfakes, but this technology has much wider applications beyond some internet entertainment, of course. For example, in marketing or film industry. And you can go wild in thinking about the future scenarios for synthetic media. I personally really like to speculate about this, and I do so during my workshops called Collective Vision of Synthetic Reality, where we collectively dream about such future. And those ideas that people come up with, they range from utopian to like insanely dystopian. And it's really interesting at the end of these workshops to gather in discussion and try to evaluate these speculative scenarios based on their impact on the society. And if you want to read about like what people usually think about, I wrote a blog post about it, and it's available on my Medium. But today I want to take you on a journey far away from this ethical discussion, actually. I don't want to talk about pros and cons of synthetic media existing in our daily communication. And I want to talk more about the artistic practice and what value AI can bring to our creative process. The trend is that the tools that create synthetic media are becoming better and better. And the ultimate goal is to achieve such photorealistic quality that our eyes would not be able to distinguish between the real and fake footage. There are many ways how to achieve this. I am picking now just a few examples. So this is, for example, a famous StyleGAN. It can generate photorealistic representation of our world, for example, human faces, or actually whatever you train the model on. It can be cats, cars, or any kind of image category. But we can also just draw and mark areas with specific textures and then let neural networks synthesize it into an image. Here we see the tool Gauguin from NVIDIA that generates, well, almost photorealistic nature sceneries. And again, depending on the dataset, it does not have to be just nature. We can synthesize models for e-shops and change their clothes and bodies, combining the two approaches mentioned before. We can estimate 3D scenes based on 2D photos. And the latest announcement from NVIDIA is a set of AI tools for developers that can be implemented in video conferencing apps. It's basically a new video compression standard that can replace H.264. And what it means is that you would be sending just small number of frames, and the parts in between will be synthesized using facial landmarks. So the person on the other side of the video call would be looking at you, and that this video would look completely real and maybe even better in quality, but it's actually not real. So what does it mean? Well, this all sounds pretty great. I see that the more real synthetic media look, they are less and less real in its essence. And that exposes us to a great amount of visual uncertainty. 2 years ago, I started working with synthetic media, and at that time from the position of a visual communication designer. And facing this visual uncertainty, all of a sudden, it was really hard for me, especially because at that time I was really advocating for visual transparency in visual communication. So how to get from fearing visual uncertainty towards embracing it? And I will tell you a story about it. So those 2 years ago, I wanted to evaluate the realness of outputs from StyleGAN. And I think the best way to do it is to take your own selfie and generate it again through StyleGAN and then look into your own eyes. So using StyleGAN encoder, you can position your face in the latent space and define vectors value for specific facial features. And then you can move on those vectors to different values and change the face. And it is much different from Photoshop, because here you don't know what you're doing and you're just, or what you are going to get. So you definitely can surprise yourself with some results. And the possibilities are endless. On one of the workshops, we explored these possibilities, and we got a human dog mutant, or we were able to generate babies from 2 or more people. And now the question is, can we go even one step beyond that? Sure, we can. This is the antiface, or the representation of my face with negative values. I am very excited that StyleGAN is having no problem with delivering such concept. Now we can speculate about StyleGAN's choice of textures and colors here. But to me, the staggering part is that here we can visualize something our mind would not be able to imagine. Like, you can also ask yourself, like, what would an idea of a face with negative values look like in your mind? Does it have shapes, textures, or colors? It is similar to trying to imagine a color that does not exist, something that is completely outside of the spectrum of light that we can perceive. So AI can show us stuff that is not even possible and show it in a photorealistic quality. So this was actually the beginning of my experiments 2 years ago that led to creating a project called Strange Attractions that I will introduce to you. With this easy demo tool that was available at the time, I could just play with these vectors and change the features of the face. And I discovered all kinds of weird corners in latent space. Sometimes I was not even sure whether it's still human or not. And these were morphing in between genders and emotions. And at this point, we knew that there is much more to discover, and that we needed to look into the code of StyleGAN, which allowed us then to visualize much more beautiful outcomes. So this is the Strange Attractions. I'm sorry. As StyleGAN is designed to generate photorealistic outputs, we are in this project challenging the algorithm and exploring the area outside of its intended use. So these faces, they rise from the neural network's interrupted face generation process and reveal the network's attempt to recall a human face. We could say that we are rewiring the process and changing the objective of StyleGAN model with what we could call as well network bending. So these hallucinated faces are carrying really strangest emotions, from quirky looking to abstract ghosts. And this project presents a wide range of visual possibilities that are behind the process of image synthesis, while stressing the importance of freedom in experimentation with open code. Strange Attractions were now also featured in this year's AI Art Gallery, which is part of NeoRISP conference within the workshop on machine learning for creativity and design. And I recommend checking this website and seeing also other projects that were chosen for this year. And now I would like to talk a little bit about animating. So we wanted to at some point to move the project forward and animate these faces. Here I'm experimenting with a tool called Avatarify, which uses first order motion model for an image animation. It's actually, well, it's a way of animating an image with driving video, and in this case, it's a web camera input. I was specifically interested in those abstract ones, where you suddenly start seeing the face where it was hardly noticeable before. And here we have more faces following the same script. So when I'm thinking about animation, there are again many different ways how to achieve this, and none of them is right. It really depends on the use case and what kind of features you want to keep in the image. But I also want to say that in some cases it is actually easier to animate with some low-key methods, such as simply creating an AR filter in Snapchat's Lens Studio. So this little story brings us to the question I would like to ask. Can we and should we invite AI in our creative process? What value can it bring? And is it still art? And who's the artist? Is it AI or us? We have to be aware of the critique of generative art, generative AI art in this case, and understand the difference between good art and what Joanna Zilinska calls a glorified version of Candy Crush. There is a lot of unoriginal neural art popping up these days, and it's that kind of art that is just abusing this new aesthetic and celebrating the technical novelty of computer vision and generative models. So this is a question for everyone who is working with AI these days, to not fall into the rabbit hole of mindless admiration and pointless production of a spectacle. So with this critical mindset, I'm trying to formulate the features of creative dialogue between a human artist and AI. And I want to stress at this point that this list is incomplete and most probably also not objective. So first thing is, when asking a question, how is the role of an artist changing and what it means to work with AI, we realize that when collaborating with AI has this ambivalent position of being a human creation and a creator at the same time. And the artist moves more towards being a curator. And it's not only about curating the outcomes, but also about having the opportunity to create the inputs. So the datasets, the datasets neural network is learning on. And I like to think about it this way, that I cannot curate my own dataset, I mean the one that's in my internal neural network, because this dataset was collected over my whole life, and as I'm aging, I'm just collecting biases that on one hand help me to survive, but on the other hand, they are narrowing my worldview. So there comes the possibility to overcome this limited perception of the world, and with that comes also responsibility of not projecting our biases into machine learning. Another beautiful feature is deliberately working with ambiguity. Leaving the space for multiple interpretations of the visuals was embraced already in the modern art in the early 20th century, but somehow we feel more perplexed interpreting ambiguous images when it comes to AI outputs. Art using generative adversarial networks exhibit visual indeterminacy. Visual indeterminacy describes images that appear to depict real scenes, but on closer look, they defy coherent spatial interpretation. So here we have some very indecisive outputs from Big GAN. Aaron Hartzman talks about visual indeterminacy in GAN art in his paper, where he hypothesizes that indeterminacy is a consequence of a powerful but imperfect image synthesis model that must combine general classes of objects, scenes, and textures. GAN models seem to be predisposed to producing indeterminate images. However, like we can see in this diagram, the evolution of generative models now progresses to bigger accuracy. Like the new version of StyleGAN is now really making it almost impossible to get anything abstract out of it. So to find something interesting and reach bigger visual indeterminacy, artists need to manipulate the models and sometimes even destroy its original purpose. I think it is actually much better than just using big GAN like a casino slot machine. A proof of that this is possible to bend the neural network is the project Strange Attractions. So the generative models will not only now make it hard for you to have influence over the form, they will be also by design keep you on generating new copies of the same. This can be hacked, but by adding tension in certain parts of the process, especially in learning process of training of a model. Scott Eaton, a sculptor who experiments with his own AI models, described the tension in between what the model was trained on and input he introduces to it. So the sculpture on the left is generated by a drawing model he trained on cubes, but he started drawing curved lines to see how the model will react to it. The model is then trying to figure out something it never saw before, and by this is becoming a creative tool that is coming with new original outputs. Ambiguity is connected closely to our tendency to give meanings to things. AI cannot do that. It can recognize images, of course, but it does not understand what it really means. But at the same time, it's beautiful to watch testing the synthetic vision and see the innocence it still has. Here we see a project by Memo Acton from the Learning to See series. It shows he is showing random objects, in this case cleaning supplies, to the neural network, and it interprets it abstractly, what leads to this beautiful animation. Then again, we humans interpret this as poetic scene of sea waves, horizon, sunset, and clouds. Memo says, an artificial neural network looks out onto the world and tries to make sense of what it is seeing. But it can only see through the filter of what it already knows, just like us. End of quote. So I totally agree with this, because we too see things not as they are, but as we are. And this brings us back to this idea of an inner data set. Many neural artists also talk about how they are using their intuition more when they are working with AI in a constant dialogue. Intuition is something we possess and machines not, or at least so far. And if we want to differentiate ourselves from machines, maybe also on the job market, I think this is the way to start embracing the intuition. One of the most important features is continuously questioning the use of AI and synthetic media through critical artistic exploration. This led me to thinking about synthetic identities we are already building, and what it means to wear a mask of a face of another person, although that person never existed. So this is a project called StyleGAN Anonymizer that places a random generated face on your face through an AR filter and can be used as an anonymization tool. Or I'm questioning a speculative scenario of personalized synthetic advertising where you can imagine that in commercials, the actors would be replaced with familiar faces from your own personal surrounding. And by creating this deepfake and this video that demonstrates the scenario, I was able to open up a critical discussion about such future, as well as test how it would work in practice. So if you want to read more about this scenario and the process how this deepfake was made, you can read about it as well on my Medium. Another thing that occurs when working with AI is changing workflow. Some things are just not done in the same way as one would expect. It really requires constantly rethinking the processes, and you have to be flexible enough to ditch some direction after spending quite a lot of time with it and not getting the desired results. But of course, the ultimate goal is to make things more efficient. In the past, I used to make music videos for metal band, and before AI stepped into my life, I always spent an awful lot of time with collages and trying to find the best footage to achieve the desired distorted look that would fit this music genre. And now, something that took days, if not weeks, I could achieve in half an hour. So this is an experiment which I called Metalgen, and I got inspired by this AI-generated death metal that plays 24/7 on YouTube. This is a part of a project of Dadabots who experiment with generated music genres. So if you want to hear a next album of Beatles or Nirvana or such, then go check it out at their website. So in my workflow, instead of traditional methods and then editing in After Effects, I would just take a random nature scene, of course from Scandinavia, and started experimenting. I used DeepLab to extract semantic map from the footage for every frame, and then let the generative model synthesize the map into a generated nature. And then I applied a style transfer, which takes the aesthetic from one image and transfers it to another. And in this case, it was actually a sequence of frames. And the result is beautiful. I could not do this better. Style transfer is probably, you know it already. It's very used nowadays very often, but people mostly just like take a selfie and put a Van Gogh filter on the image, and it can achieve like really great results when exploring the possibilities, but also must be used wisely. Of course, this part of the process, this one part was not necessary to achieve style transfer, but I added it there because it allowed me a bigger control over the distortion of the image. And that was the goal that I wanted to achieve. When talking about workflows, I like to mention Project Archigan. It's a model that generates new layouts of apartments in apartment buildings. And it is trained on layouts that are then turned into semantic map. I think this project nicely explains the nature of a creative dialogue with AI. Perhaps AI could help us with the initial stage of sketching and iterate the first ideas for us without going too much into paths that would lead to dead ends. However, a critical intervention inside of this process from the side of an architect or designer or an artist is necessary. So to summarize it, we are intervening the generative process with curating the inputs and outputs, and therefore having a power over the otherwise automatic process. We are aiming for bigger ambiguity to open outputs to external interpretations. We are deliberately creating tension inside of the learning process and giving meanings to the outcomes. We are facing AI. We are becoming aware of what makes us humans irreplaceable. For example, intuition, which is something we forgot that we have in our over-the-top scientific rational world. And while enjoying all this, we are constantly questioning the process and willing to adapt to new, sometimes quirky and sometimes very efficient workflows. So, like I said in the beginning, this list is incomplete because this journey is not over yet. And at the end, I want to finish with some recommendations. One would be, if you want to do something with these models, experiment before it's too late. Because the creative tools for working with AI models are becoming slowly very unfriendly towards free experimentations. The trend is to bake everything in simple one-click post-process tools. such as Photoshop neural filters. And I have nothing against those, but you will never be able to manipulate that code anymore. Maybe you know application Runway ML. It used to be a free space for experimentation, even for people who didn't know how to code. However, even there, we can see the turn towards just offering easy effects for video editing, such as automatic background extraction and so on. So let's see what the future brings. Lastly, I would like to share my educational cards with you. Because I was mentioning several of the AI models now, and I didn't go too much into detail of how they work. So if you're curious about it, you can check these cards out that I made first for myself to kind of make some order in what already exists, so what models are there. And now I realize that it's nice to share, so you can download it for free or order a physical card deck. And these cards are divided in 7 categories. There is image synthesis, video synthesis, sound synthesis, text generation, recognition, and then models for post-processing and workflow. And that brings me to my last slide. So that will be all from me. If you would like to connect, you can check my website, find me on Twitter or Instagram, or send me an email. And now I would like to engage in a discussion with you. Thank you.